Cool. So I would welcome everybody to this first ever podcast, except we don't have a name for it. Maybe we crowdsource it, or maybe it's red pilled with MK Ultra, which unfortunately I wasn't recording when Bilbo, aka Billy, just said that. So let's get this started. I'm here with Billy. I've been pronouncing your last name wrong for years. Can you tell me how to pronounce it correctly?
My last name is Ludke. It's like
Key.
Lucky with a D in there.
Wow, that's good to remember, although I've already forgotten. But the point stands. This is our first ever episode. Um, if you've ever heard me in a Twitter space or in any podcasts, I hate boring podcasts. I hate long introductions. Everybody hates fast forwarding through the first 15 or 20 minutes. Um, so with that said, Billy, it would be amazing if you can give us all 2 or 3 minutes. That's the challenge on your background, and then I guess you can tell us a little bit about Intuition. And I failed to mention Billy is the founder of Intuition, but we'll get into those details. First, Billy, tell us a little bit about how you got here.
Amazing. Yeah, and also I'm just thinking that maybe also you should do an introduction afterwards, but we can save that for later.
Cool.
So yeah, I guess my intro to the space was I really enjoyed botting in video games. Sorry, Blizzard. And so if for those of you that don't know what that is, you basically have your computer play the game for you and level up and grind and acquire items on your behalf while you're not playing the game, and then you come back to a bunch of amazing stuff. And that feeling of just having the computer kind of do stuff for me was the coolest thing in the world. And then learned about Bitcoin back in 2012 and just started off as a very small time hobbyist GPU miner. And I just thought that was super cool that I could just kind of have my computer do stuff for me and I could come back and I could have like a tiny bit of Bitcoin. So that was awesome. And at the time I didn't really like fully understand what Bitcoin was doing. I just knew that people were willing to pay real money for these things. And then inevitably, as one does, just dove down the rabbit hole, read the white paper, learned a little bit more, and was like, oh, this is actually gonna change everything forever. And so yeah, at the time I was living in San Francisco and started going to kind of like Bitcoin meetups and stuff. And um kind of like I feel like there was this period where I guess 2013 happened and price went up and a lot of like money people got involved and a lot of the conversation was around more of like it was less kind of philosophical and esoteric and like let's change the world for the better and computer science oriented, and it became a lot more diluted with kind of just people looking to make a quick buck. And so kind of got a little bit disillusioned with that for a little bit. And then early 2014 was at this hacker house in San Francisco at some party and was just outside out front kind of talking to this guy about Bitcoin because that's kind of what we did. And he's like, hey, have you guys like heard of the Ethereum white paper? This thing just got released recently. You guys should totally check it out. And that guy who has since faded into anonymity, so I will preserve his anonymity, explained Ethereum in still what I think is one of the best ways that anyone has ever described it. And I oftentimes use this way to describe it myself, but he explained it so well to the point that I wrote down in my notes, Ethereum, check this out. And so I went home, checked it out, and found out that Vitalik was going to be speaking at the first kind of like, I guess, Silicon Valley Ethereum meetup the following week. And I was like, oh, dude, this guy Vitalik is going to be here next week. We got to go down and go to this meetup. And so I drove this guy and this other guy down to that meetup and met just the most incredibly brilliant people I had met in a really long time and just knew that they were onto something and knew that that was where I wanted to be. And that was March of 2014, and the rest is history. I've since just been full time crypto ever since then. Helped start the blockchain consulting practice at Ernst and Young. I've been at Consensus for 6.5 years. I'm still over at Consensus as an advisor. And over that time, I really got interested in decentralized identity stuff early on in the Ethereum days because I was at working for E and Y in their blockchain consulting practice, and one of the biggest things was just kind of high sensitivity identity. And I started building these kind of KYC POCs. And that led me to get introduced to a bunch of other identity people. And so when I ended up joining Consensus, I ended up working on Uport, which was kind of the first self-sovereign identity project. And that kind of dipped me deeper down the rabbit hole. And I haven't really been able to like escape the rabbit hole since. And everything that I think about, I kind of have this identity slant when thinking about it. And because identity is just this such a critical, important primitive that it kind of underlies every single use case. And so anytime I think about kind of architecting some sort of blockchain enabled system, oh, well, let's slot identity in there because that makes a whole lot of sense. And so that's kind of my historical journey. And there was trials and tribulations along the way. But yeah, that's it in a nutshell, I guess.
Awesome. Like a bad joke. Three dudes drive to an ICO. But I appreciate the identity slant. In 2000, I think it was 18. So like in late 2016, I'd written a bunch of these business plans and I was doing like a competitive analysis on like how I could build these decentralized companies. And then I found out that there were just already people building these companies and then I could just buy their token and the rest is history. But during that time, I really like became obsessed with like the paradigm shift of decentralization. And identity is like one of those first use cases that I think people can really start to understand. And I remember there was I think it was Zug, one of the two, Switzerland. They put was it the real estate market on the blockchain, 2018 or something?
It was their passports.
Their passports. And I read that report and like we had like recently topped and I was like, this thing's not top, it's going higher. Like the entire country just moved their passports onto the blockchain. This is the future. And I don't think what people appreciate, and I would call this the biggest narrative not being priced in. That was right, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. I just counted on my fingers. That was over 6 years ago about. And a lot of promises have been made over that period of time. And I think it often leaves a lot of quote unquote crypto natives a bit disillusioned because things don't come to fruition. But actually, what you're building right now is that piece of the tech stack. Like it is here, it is arriving, it is ready for developers. And I don't think the market has largely understood that. And I'm just kind of curious, like over the period of time from passports going on chain as nothing but a headline and intuition today, I guess let's stop there. What is intuition? Let's take a step backward.
That is a really good question. So intuition is kind of the complex way that I explain it. That is not the best way to explain it, but I'll do it anyway. Is this kind of open, permissionless, decentralized knowledge graph composed of attestations about things. So I guess the best way to frame it, especially if you are already familiar with kind of the world of verifiable data and decentralized identity, is as MK was pointing out, we've been building this stuff for a long time and the infrastructure has arrived. It's ready to go. There's like back when we were in the Zug days, it was still kind of like POC phase. I don't think we were really ready to move sovereign nations onto the identity stack. But over the past, I don't know, 6, 7 years, things have matured really significantly. And so now you're seeing like California put their driver's licenses on like a DID stack, and the EU, I think, are moving like 400 million people to decentralized identifiers or something crazy like that, like in the near future. And so the infrastructure has arrived. It's here. A lot of the pieces of the puzzle have already been built. But what we're seeing is we're seeing two things. And this is kind of how intuition slots into the puzzle. So the first thing is a lot of the use cases being addressed are centered around the identities of people, and they're focused on these like high criticality, highly political, highly sensitive things like a passport or a driver's license or a university degree. And those things are they're game changing. They'll change the world for sure. I think we're on the cusp of us making that leap very shortly. But no one has really focused on like the identity, the rest of the identity of people, and on the identity of things that aren't people. And so I think some of the most important aspects of our identities are it's the subjective stuff. It's not this like deterministic stuff. It's the non-deterministic things. It's like a person's professional reputation or like if it's not a person, maybe it's the quality of a product or business, or, comments on a publication. Like all of those things help kind of derive the identity of the thing that is being referenced. And so there's just been this like huge gap in the identity stack wherein most players revolve around kind of creating attestations that are deterministic, where it's like provably true or false. And there wasn't anyone really focusing on these non-deterministic, more subjective statements yet, like how much should I trust MK? Kind of these reputational use cases. So that's kind of one place that we are trying to slot in.
All
Then the
right,
second place is, yeah, go
I
ahead.
have
Yeah.
to stop. I have to stop you there. We have to unpack that because I feel like most people probably heard that for the first time and are like, wow, that sounds awesome. What does it do? Um, let's start back at this open, permissionless knowledge graph, I think were your words, for data attestations. Like, forget the how you do that, right? I don't think this is a Git book brought to podcast. I think
Yep.
why do that?
Yeah. The first is kind of, I guess it's the objective is to decouple data from platforms and to decouple algorithms from platforms. So like the way the paradigm currently works is every platform has its data and it has its algorithm. So you go to Twitter and you interact with Twitter data, and you interact with the Twitter data through the Twitter algorithm. You can't like toggle to a different algorithm, or you can't pull in data from elsewhere super easily to kind of like arrive at a sort of reputation score for the person that you're interacting with or something like that. And so all of this is in pursuit of trying to the best of our abilities, like decouple the data from the platform, store it in this like neutral, open, decentralized place, do the same for algorithms, and then you create kind of this verifiable data lake that any application can tap into, anyone can write to and read from for any arbitrary purpose. And then the data is verifiable, so you have verifiable attribution who created the data. And so what that allows you to do is it allows people to retain ownership over the data. They can still have their little data moat, but the data is just accessible and discoverable via this one kind of massive knowledge graph, instead of you interact as like, let's say a developer, you interacting with like 100 different APIs to pull data from 100 different centralized sources. There's like one knowledge graph that maps all the verifiable data, and you just interface with kind of one singular API to get all of the data that you need for your specific use case. So that's
So,
kind of
so
like,
you're
yeah,
sorry, I have to interrupt. So essentially, what I'm hearing is you're solving the Twitter API problem for the world in one way or another. What I'm
yeah,
understanding here is, and I'm making some jumps, but what I'm understanding here is when you separate the algorithmic layer and data layer of applications and you move that to a universally accessible protocol layer, you're saying there are going to be material differences, right? I guess for the end user is who should experience that change the most. I guess another road we can go down is like what's going to happen to these large like
hmm
technology monoliths that get disrupted with that model. But let's not go there. Why, as an end user, like what does it do for me? Like, okay, so cool.
yeah.
Like now that no longer now that Google and Facebook don't own that anymore, like, and I have it, like what does that get me?
Gets you a lot of stuff. And so some super low hanging fruit examples are like right now, I can't take my 5-star Uber rating and rent an Airbnb, or I can't take my 20-year reputation with Bank of America and open a Wells Fargo account or get some sort of under collateralized loan in DeFi, or like I can't, when I go to Amazon and I look at the reviews, I don't have an Amazon friends list. And so I just see 10,000 reviews from anonymous accounts that I have no idea who these people are. I've never clicked on one of those accounts ever. And so like what this new paradigm shift unlocks is like the ability to have portable data and portable social graphs and portable algorithms. And so when you go to
Whoa.
Amazon, instead of just seeing a bunch of reviews from people that you don't know, you can just like import your decentralized friends list or your decentralized trust graph and filter things by the people you care about. It doesn't have to be friends. It's like, oh, like I am looking at supplements, and so I want to see if Dr. Huberman has said anything about the supplements that I'm interacting with, or anything like that. So just this ability to take kind of your trust graph or trust graphs, because you probably want contextual trust graphs. So taking your kind of like trust graphs with you anywhere, taking your data with you anywhere. So your preferences, maybe you want everything to be dark mode and you want your typography to be X and you want like your reputation to show up as something, I don't know. You can just like take your data with you wherever you go. And then any data can just be like these applications become less of these like monolithic platforms and they just become interfaces that we use to interact with this like underlying sea of data. And so you kind of escape this vendor lock-in wherein I'm not going to use new social platforms because all of my data is locked into my current social platforms. It would take me a really long time to kind of build up my data and my reputation from zero. And so I got to kind of sit on the sidelines and wait to see if any of these new social platforms take off to the point where I'd be like, okay, I'm no longer at risk of wasting my time and energy and attention building my reputation within this context. What's happening now is like it's really hard to compete with the incumbents because the incumbents have this moat of all of your data and all of your preferences and like you're not going to leave unless the user experience is something like 10x better. But if you could escape vendor lock-in, maybe someone builds an interface that is or a user experience that is slightly better than Twitter. Then you don't really need to interact with the Twitter application layer anymore. You just like move to the next
Hmm.
one. And so it just unlocks this ability to experiment with new user interfaces at a scale that we haven't really seen before. And I think the only parallel we can draw is like what DeFi did to the financial system, where before DeFi there was just like very little financial innovation happening, and then you just like make it more permissionless, and people just build all this crazy stuff. And I think the same thing is going to happen with data once you like unlock and democratize data.
Wow. So I have to come clean to the audience. I've been playing dumb. I was wanting to get to this point in the conversation to jump in and do my best to take the absolute vision that you have spent years cultivating and try to put it into layman's terms. And I think you achieved that. Um, Now, I have some deep knowledge of what intuition's building and this idea of portable data. Let's quickly touch on one topic for the audience, real quick. Knowledge graphs and social graphs, for those who don't know, are like databases, or you can kind of think about them maybe as like a data visualization, or it's like how data relates to one another. And it's sort of like one of the most important things on the internet. The reason Google and Facebook advertising works so well is because of the mapping they've done of topics and people and connections and recommendations. Like their core, one of their core monetizable features that gives them so much value is this ability to navigate the back end of the web and directly serve content, ideas, friendships, products, experiences to end users. So that's what a knowledge and social graph is. I think probably 99% of people don't know, don't care, and will never interact with it. So I think it's really interesting because it's like one of the internet's best kept secrets is that like the algorithm, the thing that like Congress can't figure out how to regulate, like the tech behemoth that is influencing culture and politics and is being weaponized at like the state level, like is this knowledge and social graph that is being used that has never existed at this scale before. And what you're proposing is to create an alternative that, let's put the idealism aside, right? Let's forget about like I can own it, right? And it's mine, but quite frankly returns it to the public domain and says, you know what, this isn't privatizable. This privatization of this information over multiple decades has led to negative externalities. And Billy, what I'm hearing from you is we can start to build out the shared knowledge graph, social graph. I guess we can call this, maybe we call this the intuition graph. We can start to build out the intuition graph, which becomes a development primitive for the next generation of developers, right? Why bootstrap your own database with zero users if I can actually have any user come sign up and immediately I've imported their interests, I've imported their top 25 friends list, I've imported their maybe shipping profile, maybe even billing information gets in here, but like it plug and play. It's a key that belongs to them and that
Hmm.
all developers all over the world can implement, from my understanding, quite easily.
Yeah, that was well said. And I think it's also really important to kind of continue to zoom out from people, because when people hear identity, their minds always go to the identities of people. And they think of like use cases like KYC, AML, civil resistance, under collateralized lending, like reputation stuff. And like it's not just plug and play for people, where a huge piece of the puzzle, where like if we can just solve the people identity problem, amazing. But then it's also like how many times have you like I don't know. I'm shopping for things. Oftentimes, the thing that I'm shopping for exists in many different places with many different reviews under many different brands with many different prices. And it's the same thing. And so, like, let's say, you're kind of building a Shopify storefront or something. Um, like Flow right now is like you create a new identity for the product that you are like creating a storefront for. But what if like the identity of that product like lived at the layer of the internet, and you could again you just drag and drop. You like, oh, here's that product. Let me just drag and drop it into my storefront, and it comes along with all of the reviews from all of the platforms, as opposed like everything just is drag and drop at that point. You just have identities for all things. You have data for all things. It can be a button on a website, it can be a product, it can be a business, it can be anything should have an associated decentralized digital identifier. And then they all should
Wow.
have like the data about those things aggregated around that identifier, as opposed to aggregated at the layer of the application or platform.
I love that example. I think I've heard a lot of your examples, the ones that are hard to follow and the ones that are easy. And the reason I love that one is because it actually just highlighted a new use case to me. And like, okay, I have tried to always put myself sort of at the forefront of paradigm shifting technology, right? Like if you can pick up or sniff out something that is fundamentally paradigm shifting, right? Like you are skating way ahead to where the puck's going. Um, and in the modern day's current internet landscape, there's one name bigger than anybody else's, right? And that's Amazon. And they own this massive database of products and this massive fulfillment system. And anybody can come in and sell, right? And either sell an existing listing or create their own, and Amazon does fulfillment. But what I just realized from the example you just used is that intuition with time and adoption can create a logistics competitor to Amazon, a company that steps in and says, we support these 10,000 universal intuition supported SKUs. And we're going to build a front end, right? We're going to build an application that makes it very easy for you to hook up your seller account and like pick your product images and choose your SKUs. And then we will populate based off the intuition graphs database of images, reviews, purchase trends, purchase histories, price points, and we'll handle the shipping and the wholesaling and logistics, right? And maybe I'm misunderstanding something, but you're essentially helping to bootstrap entire industries that currently would have an extreme problem trying to break in.
Yeah, 100%. The think a lot of things only have like a digital moat, and so I think those will be the things that maybe get disrupted first. Physical moats like Amazon
Hmm.
fulfillment, that's gonna be a hard one to disrupt. But
Yeah.
I at least the like at least we kind of aren't playing from this hamstrung position of also not having the data. Like at least we can like whoever wants to build a fulfillment competitor can at least have the data now, which is really great. And yeah, I think it opens up the possibility for more experimentation, and that's kind of what it's all about. It's like the more and the faster you're experimenting with new things, like the better the end result is going to be. And so we just have this rampant stagnation that has been introduced by vendor lock-in that has resulted from our identities and our data living with these incumbents. And so it's like I only interact with very few number of applications on the web if I really think about it. Like I go on Twitter, sometimes I go to Reddit, use email, use Telegram. Like that's pretty much it. And so like Twitter, let's say, owns my digital social life. And I only get to interact with new social features when Twitter introduces a new social feature. And that's just kind of absurd. Like it would be really cool if like other developers could also build new social feature sets that do interesting things, but like operate from the same place of data availability in a way where it's like someone builds new social platform right now, but they don't have any of my data. So it's kind of, I don't care. I'm not going to interact with it. But if I could just like use the same data and use the same algorithms and interact with the new novel feature, that's really interesting to me. So I don't know. I think, yeah, I think we disrupt software first, but I do think there's potential just like, I mean, it's just like, it's underlying everything, like identity and reputation and data. They're critical pieces of every puzzle. And so I do think that every single industry can probably be significantly disrupted.
Yeah, so you're crowdsourcing data aggregation, and essentially each new
Hmm.
implementation or each new adopt developer who adopts intuition is like another node in this network of data aggregation. And there's been a
Right.
multi-decade head start by large tech companies. And like if you kind of take a step back and you think about it, like Google search, they were like, oh, wow, look at all this information we got. And then they figured out how to scale that and they started pulling information out of Google Voice and out of Gmail and out of search. And then social companies came out and then they were like, oh, we can pull information when you're using the app. And then they're like, oh, we can pull information when the app is running in the background. And Apple didn't like that so much. And there was this race that went on for decades that nobody talks about, which was the race to aggregate information into your monolith. And that I think I can say has been largely disrupted by recently when Apple made its pivots to how data could be accessed directly from devices, from app developers. And I think that was like a moment in time that we'll be able to look back on and say, oh, wow, like the race for data aggregation by any means possible is probably slowing down. And now introduce intuition and introduce Billy, and there's this new approach to the aggregation of data, which is like the proliferation of software at the democratized crowdsourced layer, where I, a developer, can say, oh, yeah, like I want my application to be one click connect with intuition. And I want to make sure that like I can import all of know, the intuition graph, right? Like those social connections or those interests or whatever else belongs to that user. And I know we're going back to the person example, but I think that's the most tangible. And for every developer that makes that choice to offer like intuition login, in this example of mine, onboarding funnel for data aggregation is born. And like that can scale exponentially.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting piece to touch on because it's like right now everyone is kind of the whole Web3 ethos is where we're kind of like three-threeing and coordinating and collaborating versus competing. And like the Web2 landscape right now is just all competition for who can acquire the most data and build the largest data moat. And so if you're one company trying to accumulate all the data you can, maybe if you got a bunch of smart people and resources, you can do a good job of playing that game. But like, what if everyone was just doing that job for everyone else and like the data was just accumulating to this single neutral layer that you got ownership of for contributing data to. And so everyone who is like building out the knowledge graph, like is being rewarded as this knowledge graph grows. And then you're all just kind of like collaborating on this kind of singular. I'll keep using the term data lake because I don't have anything better right now, but like data, everyone is just contributing. Every application developer that builds a new user interface that's integrated with intuition, it's like that interface is like flowing data to singular data lake, to singular knowledge graph that anyone else can pull from. And so you get three apps integrated contributing data. That's pretty cool. You get five, you get 10, you get the whole internet. Like that is where things start to get really interesting. And I think it's really important for us to like get it right and get it right now because of something that you kind of alluded to a little bit earlier of just these centralized modes of operating being kind of hijacked by malicious actors, or maybe not even malicious, but just like people trying to skew things in one way or another without any transparency. And so, like, there's just the internet is there's so much psyops right now, and it's really hard to determine what is psyops and what's not. And I feel like a lot of the public sentiment is swayed by kind of people try like pulling levers in one direction or another. And so what we kind of unlock is just it's just verifiable attribution. It's just transparency, and it's just showing you who is saying what. And with that, I think if you want to listen to the psyops, you totally can, but you should at least be able to recognize that, hey, this thing is propagating from this like node in the network. Like this person or this organization is what is like originating or spreading this information, or like, hey, the people that you trust, none of them have like signaled support of this thing, so maybe take this thing with a grain of salt. So that's kind of like a
Hmm.
super deep rabbit hole to go down, but yeah, I think it's just really important for us to kind of try to solve it now. I don't know if we can reach the holy grail, but if we don't try, then the internet becomes like an increasingly scary place.
Completely. I maybe that conversation's not another time. But this just feels like and sounds like the end state of a public forum in a certain sense. And I'm focusing on a specific use case, which is like the propagation of ideas through text, right? And Twitter is your easiest example there, but you name it, it can be news. And currently, there's a couple of approaches. There's the approach of saying, hey, we don't actually enforce any rules, and then somehow you get shut down by some type of overlording power. Or you say, we have our own rules only for something like the Twitter files to prove that just is tight coordination between um, government and tech companies to directly censor specific topics. And then you have the current Twitter approach, which is, you know what, like you can say most things, but also we can attach community notes. So like if the thing you say is so off base, like we're gonna put an asterisk and we're gonna report it. But you're taking that a step further and you're opening up the hood to those who are interested in digging back there and say, actually, this idea, this falsehood, or this fact, it propagated from this address or this cluster or this source. And you can actually start to map the propagation of information, I guess, for lack of a better term. And now that I'm hearing that, and let's try to keep this like as a family friendly topic as possible. Okay, got one. There was a period of time, depending how old you are, that there was this thing called planking, where people would like lay down on ledges or things like on their stomach and take a photo like they were a plank. And it kind of like if social media largely was run on intuition, like you could actually map the propagation of people planking and potentially even find
Love
like
it.
the first plankers.
Yeah, I think that's love that idea, and I concept of this game that gets created once intuition exists, wherein it's like you have verifiable attribution of you saying a thing at a given point in time. And so it could be like, I was the first planker, or it could be like, you were the first supporter of this meme, or you're the first person using this meme, or I was stealing Ethereum back in 2014. It's like all we have right now is kind of like anecdotal evidence, or like people were there and they heard you saying it. But like I would love to be able to like signal my truth about things and have that recorded kind of forever and be like, hey, look, like I'm pretty good at kind of like predicting trends or identifying truths, and so maybe that becomes my social clout. It creates this new social game where it's kind of happening on Twitter right now, and like I think a lot of the bigger accounts are um, things that are good at expressing truths or seeing the future ahead of the rest of the pack, but just kind of like extrapolating that out and kind of allowing people to play that game in a more kind of credibly neutral arena where it's like you could play that game in Twitter land right now, but at any point, if you're expressing the wrong truth, like you could get shut down and then your account's gone and you spent 10 years building your account and then, oh, sorry, all that time and energy that you spent building up that following, it's gone. That just, it doesn't feel right and it doesn't feel permanent. And I think that's kind of the, one of the biggest unlocks here is the permanence of things. And I think that's why NFTs took off and why Ethereum it feels a certain way. It feels permanent because it's like, oh, it's here forever. If I go to Etherscan or if I like look at my wallet balance anywhere, it's like it is there. The NFT is, no one can like take that from me. And so we have this concept for money, we have it for like assets generally. And so like why not do the same thing for data? I think it's just like kind of the next logical progression.
Wow, I wish you started with that sentence because that is like probably I feel I don't know if people appreciate how profound of a concept that is, right? Like Bitcoin brought a true bearer asset, like a real bearer asset. Like if you knew you knew the private key was in my head and like you killed me, you still can't get it. And you can't say that for any physical asset. Now you're making not even this argument, but like this observation, and that Twitter example is great, but it's like my ideas, my speech, my reputation, my in the current paradigm is extremely easily coerced and is extremely fragile. And the fragility of it creates a power structure that prevents the free exchange of ideas or potentially hampers them.
Yep.
And you're making this very obvious, now it's obvious, but obvious observation of, hey, we have bearer monetary instruments. We should probably have bearer data instruments. And then it's like, wow, okay, this is all making way more sense now. Like the need for this in terms of like securing a future that gives people the option to control their paths in life, right? Like to give free agency to individuals is to allow them to receive the benefits of their work and hold on to those benefits so that they can allocate those resources as they see fit for their lives.
Someone on the team coined this term. I forget who it was, so apologies. But they're like intellectual assets. And so like right now, like I don't know, I guess you can consider some things on Ethereum intellectual assets, but like I feel like there's this big untapped market of intellectual assets that have not yet migrated over to the paradigm of Web3. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do here is exactly what you said of just kind of you owning your ideas, you owning your digital activity, your data, like everything. It just, and the sad part is like most of the world is kind of unwittingly and willingly these like digital slaves to these tech overlords, wherein like you don't own it. It feels like your Google account is yours. It feels like your Twitter account is yours, but it's not yours. It's Twitter's and it's Google's, and that they basically continuously provision access to you to be able to use your Twitter identity or your Google identity or your online identity generally.
It's worse. It's worse than that. Because if you don't have a backup, people like to give shit to crypto being like, oh, if you forget, I saw the dumbest take on Twitter the other day, and it was like, banks are great because if you forget your password, you don't lose your net worth or something just completely idiotic. And if you don't understand why that's idiotic, like just read the history of like bank collapse and default and like hyper like inflation. Anyway, oh no, I forgot my original point because of that tangent. Billy, you're gonna have to help me.
That's okay.
What was I just saying?
I don't know where you're going. You were saying something about owning your digital identity.
I remember. If you use Gmail and you don't have a recovery phone number or an additional email associated to it, and you forget your password, you're done. You can't get into it. There is no Google support team that I'm aware of, and I have tried, that can get you into that account. There is no admin password reset. Those are your credentials that are provisioned to you. Yep. And if you lose them, that's it. So it's even worse because like that extra layer of nannying of like, oh, don't worry, little Johnny, like you won't lose access to all your photos and all your emails and all your contacts. It's like, oh yeah, you will. Anyway, I
That's
took
a
us in.
that's a good example, and that's actually true because I like forgot my Gmail login credentials once, and there's nothing they can do. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's unreal.
You will own nothing and you'll be happy. So I want to come back to this idea of paradigm shifting because I think I've been thinking about these use cases for some years and we've touched on a lot of paradigm shifts, profound, not profound, developer focused, like end user focused. One thing that has stuck out to me before we took that turn towards like sovereignty was if the social graph is largely accessible or queryable, it has the potential to change the way that online communities are formed. And I think that's a paradigm shift, right? The current
Hmm.
norm is you can discover a list of recommended communities and check one by one. You can stumble upon one. You can go to a place, like we said, Reddit earlier, that has a collection of communities to begin with. You can be invited by somebody. But ultimately, there is a implicit amount of knowledge needed to know where you might fit in. Once arriving to that community, it takes time to figure out whose reputation to trust, if your reputation should be trust, what your reputation is. And the overall process is it's kind of a lot of friction, right? You got to find it, you got to navigate it, you got to prove your worth, and then you got to upkeep your presence. And in a world where the social graph is accessible, I almost envision a way for me to configure some of my interests at my profile level and be recommended to communities or a community admin maybe even puts out an invitation, right? Like an invitation to all GitHub developers working in Web3 with at least, I don't know, 5 commits and 5 pull requests in the past 6 months
Hmm.
with Twitter accounts older than 2 years who follow Vitalik and like send an invitation to people based on what we know about them, not who they are, but how we can characterize them and create all of a sudden communities are self-forming because we've moved the coordination there to the protocol. And that's a paradigm shift. That changes the way people interact with each other digitally forever. That's wild.
Yeah, and I think I'm just thinking about this now, but I think that's what's happening with NFTs to some extent, where it's like equipping a punk avatar. It's like, oh, you're part of the punk community on Twitter, so we can just it's very easy to like distinguish. Oh, these are my people. I'm gonna follow this guy because he's got this profile picture and part of this community. And so, like in the absence of this portable community feature, like people are getting around it by like using this now portable data that already exists. So like NFTs, just like neutral data that doesn't live in any single platform. Though, like people are leveraging that concept to already find their communities online. So I don't think it's a large logical leap to get to that next step because it's kind of already happening.
Fascinating. I feel like you and I could probably talk for like 5 more hours, and we're 48 minutes in. Quickly chat about intuition, not from a conceptual standpoint, but from, I guess, like a development standpoint. Like, where is intuition? How can I stay up to date with intuition? When can I expect to interact with intuition? If I'm a builder, who do I talk to build with intuition? Like, what is going on? What is good?
Yeah, talk to us. Yeah, you'll be able to interact with intuition early next year. And if you are anyone that is interested beyond just being like an end user of the applications that are built on top of intuition, then yeah, the doors are always open. Find us somewhere, Twitter, Telegram. I don't know how this is going to be distributed, but I'm sure we'll paste some contact links wherever this is posted. Join our Discord. We have something called the Atlas, which is we're trying to turn into this neutral public forum for the discussion of kind of decentralized identity and data and reputation related concepts because that doesn't seem to really exist in any structured format yet. So hop into the Atlas, join the conversation, hop into Discord, join the conversation, reach out to us. Always happy to chat, always happy to riff on ideas or architect your system in light of the existence of intuition. And yeah, just all announcements will always be posted to Twitter and Discord. So if you want to not get the white glove treatment and want to just follow along, I think those are probably the best mediums to do it. But yeah, anything else that I'm missing, MK?
You know what you did leave out that you mentioned to me before we started recording was that a community quest was going to be kicking off on Discord that was going to have NFTs for those who complete the quest. And I think you were saying that's going to be sometime before ETH Denver, which you're going to be attending, if I'm not mistaken.
Those are all correct things. Yeah, I think what we're trying to do is kind of create the experience of interacting with intuition kind of a little bit more fun and gamified. And so like we have these conversations like this one and it's like furrowed brows and serious topics, but like this stuff doesn't have to be so daunting or serious. It can be fun. And so like what we're trying to do is create fun experiences around starting to catalyze this paradigm shift. So yeah, definitely join our Discord and stay on the lookout for the upcoming quests and associated kind of gamified experiences surrounding them. And then yeah, we'll be at ETH Denver in full force. We're sponsoring it this year, so we'll have a booth. So stop by the booth. If you're building in the hackathon, please integrate with intuition. We'll have bounties and such, so you will be rewarded for doing so. But yeah, I think that is pretty much all that I got.
And I want to say this before we wrap up. Just from the past 50 odd minutes alone, it feels like this is one of the most exciting new sectors in the space. But it feels like it's not really being talked about much. And
I
that
agree.
kind of,
And like that's yeah. No, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, and that it reminds me a lot of, and I feel like this is probably overused, but I can't think of the last person who said it. It reminds me a lot of DeFi Summer. People said that like when Friend Tech launched, but like Friend Tech ultimately ended up being like one application. But DeFi Summer was interesting because it was a small group of people in like a couple Discords and a couple builders, and everyone was like, "Oh, whoa! Like we could do all sorts of stuff right on chain, like all sorts of things." And then people started dreaming about like the really big use cases, and like eventually you ended up with like completely, decentralized perpetual swap programs and option protocols. And like at the beginning of DeFi Summer, those were just ideas, and it feels like the data layer and or social layer, or I guess the intuition graph in intuition's case, is there where it's a small group of people, a handful of builders. Everyone's like, whoa, we can build some stuff immediately. And then it's like, wow, look at all these other ideas that we can build probably in like a couple of years' time. And it reminds me of that a lot. And I'm gonna be very excited to see how these ideas mature. And there's so many nooks and crannies here. I think like there's so many slants from optimistic to pessimistic to utopian to dystopian, and like reality will probably be some blend of all of those. Um, but I think what intuition's building is noble in its attempt to fix something that is inherently prickly, I guess. Prickly is a good word. I like that word. Prickly. Cool. So I'm going to sign off there. I never gave my background. Tune in for next episode to learn about me or don't. As in, you won't learn about me, but you still should tune in. We're going to need a name for this. If you have any name ideas, feel free to comment wherever you are. Maybe we start a Twitter account for this. I don't know. So tune in next episode to find out what that is. And if you didn't know, we're coming live from GatherTown, which is Intuition's digital office, where folks work across many time zones, close to 24 hours a day, to ship this paradigm shifting technology. So thank you everybody for tuning in if you made it this far. For those of you who listen on 1.2 and 1.3x speed, that's super awesome. Thanks for staying around for 30 minutes, and we'll talk to you all next time.